let's go still further back and say, why has Egypt been slow to reform? I mean, and I think that the answer to this really lies in a political economy issue, which comes back to this. So there's a lot of literature on this, and I'm only summarizing I'm paraphrasing the conclusions of it. And what a lot of political economy theorists believe is that the reason for Egypt's slow reform is that Egypt's regimes have felt insecure because they were not legitimized by a free democratic election. They felt they did not have a constituency to which they could appeal to for reform. So the strategy adopted was that we'll give you all these subsidized goodies and other things, and you don't make a nuisance of yourself. I mean, and by and large, this policy was followed. But as I said, that the demands on the available resources keep on increasing, and in the period up to 1974, they increased even more rapidly because, I mean, there were a series of wars, the main financial markets were antagonized by Egypt's political stance, and so on. Which is not to say that Egypt's political stance was necessarily wrong. I mean, Egypt is a sovereign country and has the perfect right to adopt any policy that it deems to be in its interest, or that it deems to that it is morally committed to it. I mean, it's man does not live by bread alone. I mean, you have morals, and you may be committed to these. But the point is that policy choices have consequences. And you cannot then say, I want to be the leader of Africa, the leader of Arabs, the leader of the non-aligned, the supporter of Palestine, the supporter of the Algerians, the, you know, whatever, and yet expect that the countries I'm antagonizing will give me money and will give me technology and will give me all these things. You have to say that we will, if we follow this policy, we think that this is morally right, we'll put up and pay the price. I can offer you a choice from my own country. I mean, for as long as this war in Afghanistan was going on, Pakistan was the third biggest recipient of US aid. It was Israel, Egypt, Pakistan. But the United States did not want Pakistan to develop nuclear weapons. Pakistan decided that if India had them, and India already had a large edge in conventional weapons, the only balancing factor was nuclear weapons. So it decided to go that route, develop them, and when it tested them, US aid went from third biggest to zero. Now, we were aware that this would happen. In fact, the Prime Minister of the day made a famous speech, and he said, we'll eat grass, but we will produce these weapons because they are necessary for our survival. The best book, in fact, on the development of this Pakistan nuclear program is called Eating Grass. And it's written by the brigadier who was in charge of, for at least part of the time, in developing these. So what I'm saying is that Egypt has every right to follow whatever policy it thinks is morally right or in its interest. But then you have to take the steps. You have to bear the consequences, and you have to take the steps to shield the country from these consequences. And I think that the rhetoric was done, but the policies were not put in place, because Egypt, I think, has the people and the resources to have shielded itself from them. Now, the political economy people also say that I mean, there are many theories, but the most popular one seems to be Manker-Olson's, which is that you've got in any society, you've got different groups which have different economic interests. And these economic interests may be in conflict. But if a situation has persisted for some time, then you can say that a certain equilibrium has been reached between these conflicting groups. So, now if in this situation you want to introduce reforms, you are really talking about changing this distribution of winners and losers. So, because reform is about change. How do you break the power of the winners? Because they have become winners either by association with the military or the religious establishment or some other form. And the answer, which seems to be most applicable to Egypt, is that it takes a crisis to change this distribution. And the crisis can be a military crisis or it can be an economic crisis. If you look at the military crisis, in 1952, the revolution came about largely because people and the army felt that the defeat in Palestine was due to the politicians who had not provided it with the right weapons and training and resources and so on. So it was a military reason for the and it completely changed the economy of Egypt. I mean, there were the land reforms, there were the national. In 1956, there was another military crisis when Britain, France, and Israel invaded Egypt. And again, after that, you had the sequestration of the British and French properties, because again, they were held liable for that war, and so although previous to the war they had been in a strong position, after the war they could not sustain their position. Then in 1961 you had a political problem with the separation of Syria from the Union, and then you had much larger period of nationalization and sort of Arab socialism coming in full bloom, planning and other in 1973, after another war, you had the open door policy, the infitah. I mean, again, a complete reversal of economic policies. But the point is that it doesn't necessarily take bloodshed on your own soil or so to bring about this change. You can have an severe economic crisis that will make people think that the people in power have brought about this crisis or have not prevented us this crisis or have not shielded us from it. And then the cry goes up that business as usual cannot work and you get pressure for reform. I mean, this was one of the factors in the 1991 to 1993 reforms. I mean, there were other factors also, of course. I mean, that there was a cushion built up to shield the weakest. But what the empirical literature shows is that for an economic crisis to trigger reforms, things have to get not just bad, but very bad. And the people, I mean, for example, Easterly looked at something like 60 or 70 instances of reform, and he found that two sorts of reasons for the crisis were most important. The most frequent one was a foreign exchange crisis, when the country couldn't afford to buy food or couldn't afford to buy medicines or couldn't afford to buy basic commodities. This was the most frequent cause. But the second most frequent cause was inflation. But the inflation had to be pretty high and sustained. In fact, his finding was that inflation had to be, the inflation rate had to be 40% or more for at least 2 years, 2 consecutive years, for there to be a sufficient groundswell of public opinion saying, mish mumkin, I mean, things can't go on like this. And then there was another study done which looked at 123 countries over a period from 1953 to 1996, and which validated the same findings. So what I'm saying is that for economic distress to bring about reform means a lot of pain has to be inflicted. And this brings me to my final sort of point, which is that we don't want Egypt to go through a war or to go through economic distress of this kind to bring about reform. So one should start thinking about what kind of reforms would be most necessary, would be most productive, would be, but not just improve the economy, but I mean also, you know, make this a better, happier country to live in. And here again, the political economy literature talks about 2 generations of reforms. And I think Egypt has handled the first generation reasonably well. I mean, the first generation reforms are those which can be easily identified. And if there's political will, you can do them with the stroke of a pen almost. This is things like adjusting the exchange rate, changing the tax rate, matters like that. But it's the second generation reforms which I think Egypt should be entering. And these are longer and more difficult, because first, they are more difficult to identify. They don't have a clear policy framework to them. I mean, if you say, I want to increase exports, okay, you start with the exchange rate, you start with providing export credits, you start with, I mean, quality control and, you know, sort of giving them some numbers that your grade 1 export or your grade 2 export or whatever. This is straightforward. You want to choke off inflation, you raise the interest rate, I mean, and so on. These are, but the second generation ones are those that focus on institutions and those that focus on the system of incentives. And these are touching deep-rooted ways of behaving, and they are difficult to form, to get acceptance, and they're difficult to get to form policies for. For example, a necessary second generation reform is reforming the bureaucracy. Now I can see bureaucracy should be reformed, but I haven't told you, I mean, how. I mean, do you increase, change methods of recruitment? Do you don't give them security of tenure? Do you increase their wages? I mean, do you know, do you improve their training? What is the relationship between the bureaucracy in the governorates and the bureaucracy in the center? So there's a whole host of things that you have to work through, which are not immediately obvious. Then you also have to consider that more than a quarter of the labor force is employed in the bureaucracy in one form or another. And this doesn't include the armed forces or the public enterprises or something. So, and these people are entrenched in their habits of work. Yeah, you have to change these. I'm giving this as an example of a second generation reform. I think, I mean, the World Bank's work on institutions has not been spectacular, but it's tried to identify what would be the main institutions that you would touch. I mean, you know, where would you get the biggest bang for the buck? Even though, I mean, it might be difficult. And basically, they've come up with 3 or 4 that are common to all countries, all emerging market countries where reform would be needed. And these are the commercial judicial system, the administrative system, and the education system. I mean, I could name 6 more, but I mean, you know, you eat the elephant a bite at a time. So now, if you look at Egypt's commercial judicial system, and I'm not a lawyer, I would not presume to lecture to you on the you know, what's wrong with the judicial system or what's right with the judicial system and how it should be reformed. But I just want to give you a few indicators of its performance. The judicial system, as seen from outside, is that the judges are heavily overloaded and justice is very slow to. The average commercial case takes about 7 years to be resolved. About 85% of them are appealed, and the cassation phase takes another 2 to 5 years to get a judgment, and then it takes another 2 to 4 years for implementation. So we are looking at something like 15 years or so for the average case, and cases of more than 20 years are not unknown. And lifetime. I mean, that. So with this kind of a situation, you're not going to have too many people rushing in to invest, because I mean, even if they say that the justice system is fair, nobody's complaining about that. But the slowness means that, I mean, justice delayed is justice denied. You won't get. The costs of all this keep adding up as the process goes along. Again, the finding was, by a USAID study, the finding was that the average court costs in a commercial dispute was 7.5% of the final settlement. And they were so high because Egypt uses the commercial judicial system to subsidize the criminal judicial system. Another estimate was that at the turn of the century, I mean, I'm talking about even 20 years ago, the average judge in the commercial courts had 8,000 cases to settle, and this burden kept on increasing because the clearance rate, the number of cases filed compared to the number of cases resolved, was 36%. So 2/3 of the cases went to add to his docket every year. Now, I don't know how the man is going to resolve 8,000 cases. He can toss a coin, and I mean, heads this guy wins and tails that guy wins. And that seems to me to be the only way that he could do it in any reasonable length of time. But I'm not at all suggesting how the system should be revised, because I don't know. But what I do know from these figures is that the system needs to be revised. That people sitting over here are much wiser than me and better informed than me about this issue. But I think that what I would do if I were had any sort of authority, I would get the thinking judges together and say that if you were to improve these figures, what would it take? What salary should be offered so that you attract the best and the brightest into the law faculty, so that you get so many more people there? How many more judges would you need? Would you need to change some of the laws so that, I mean, this endless appeal and repeal and so on doesn't carry on? I don't know what they would answer, but they live at the front line. I mean, and it would be worthwhile getting their opinions on this matter. Similarly with the bureaucracy, I don't know how it would be reformed, but that it needs to be reformed, I think, is painfully obvious. And I think Heba Handousa and Noha al-Mikawi did a study on what had happened to salaries in the civil service, and in real terms, they've been compressed. It's not surprising that I know and have worked and have admiration for a number of civil servants, high-level civil servants, who are working 2 and 3 jobs at the same time. This is Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Singapore, who converted Singapore from an impoverished island into one of the wealthiest countries in Asia in the space of 1 generation. One of his favorite sayings was, if you pay peanuts, you get only monkeys to work for you. And I mean, that might be one place to begin. But that again brings us to the political economy of the problem. If the development model you're following is that we placate the population by giving them goodies and by not taxing them, where are you going to find the resources to pay the civil servants, to pay the judges? Where are you going to find the resources to improve the scientific and technical and medical education? And the talent is there. I mean, let me give an example. You go to any country in the Gulf, the best doctors, the best lawyers, the best engineers, the most efficient civil servants, the best businessmen are Egyptians. And the same man, when he comes to, and a woman, mustn't discriminate. They come to Egypt, sit down and say, oh, the government should do this and the government should do that. And these people are the hardest working people out there. The best heart surgeon in England was Samagdi Yaoub. I mean, he was knighted over there for his services over there. Trained in the Egyptian system. But I mean, had to go abroad. So nobody doubts the talent, the intelligence, the ability of the Egyptians. One does doubt a system that doesn't cash in on these talents, these abilities, and these hard work. Because as I said, the same Egyptian who is working his guts out in the Gulf is sitting back over here expecting subsidized bread and not giving a damn about hard work. So that is where you have to focus on. I've said things about the education system, and I don't need to add to that, because of course what happens is that when you are going to offer free education to a rapidly growing population and the huge youth bulge coming, establishing a university place in a technical, medical or scientific subject costs on average about 4 times or 5 times that of establishing a university place in the liberal arts. So if you're not going to expand your resources, you shovel as many people as you can into the liberal arts. You say, go read Alif Laila wa Laila, and I mean, forget about dissecting a corpse. We don't have money for corpses. I mean, then you shouldn't be surprised if large numbers of people come out only, I mean, having read Alif Laila wa Laila, and I mean, they want a job in the government, because that's all they're fit for. So the labor input into production in Egypt is not matching up with the labor input into production in the fast-growing countries. And you have to emphasize the technical, medical, scientific education, because, I mean, turn an Egyptian loose and he wins the Nobel Prize in chemistry. I mean, there's no shortage of Egyptian brains and Egyptian talent and Egyptian abilities. I mean, only a fool would doubt any of these. But one would have to look with a very jaundiced eye at a system that didn't make the best use of. I better stop here, because otherwise I'll go on for 2 hours, and I don't think you could stand my ranting for that length of time. But thank you very much for having been so patient, and now I really would like to hear your views.